In today's short video, I'm going to show you how I make my custom labels for my handmade items using my Cricut. This is an example right here of a pretty standard one that I would use. I tend to use Chicago screws for mine. So this is the size and style I'm going to show you how to do today, but you can customize this in a number of ways. You could also make something like this. This I just cut out with scissors and then attached the vinyl to it, and then I added some of these little rivets here just to give it a little bit more character. You can also, instead of using Chicago screws, you can make some that just have holes in the corners, and those will be so you can hand stitch them on as well. So there are many ways that you can customize this. But because of the requests that I got, I am going to show you how to specifically make this style right here using Chicago screws. So before we dive into Cricut Design Space and I show you how to make this size right here, let me tell you about the supplies that I'm using. So number one, I am using Chicago screws, as I mentioned. They're about 1/16. I think that's the size that I use. Pretty standard. Again, you don't have to use those. You can just use thread if you want to stitch those onto your projects. This is also what I'm using, this faux suede. It's from Cricut. I just use this because I got a really good deal on it, and it tends to work pretty well. It lasts and it's washable. So I do like this. And the vinyl that I use, I actually am using heat transfer vinyl. You can do a couple of different things. So in this case, for this label right here, this is actually just permanent vinyl. So I did use a permanent vinyl on this one. Pros with this one, it's really easy to use your permanent vinyl on here. Also, it does not discolor the suede. So on this one and on this one, you can tell that the color is a little muddier. It's a little bit darker. And that's because when you place heat on these faux suede labels, they actually tend to darken up or change color. So you have two different options. I prefer the heat transfer option. For me, it just seems like it has a lot of longevity to it, and it's a little bit easier for me. And I have a bunch of heat transfer vinyl. So that is what we are using there. So those are the supplies that we're going to need. So here we are in Cricut Design Space. Great news about making these labels. It doesn't cost you anything except for the supplies we just talked about. So everything I do in Cricut Design Space, I use the free functionality. I don't pay for a subscription. If I need to get any images or create any graphics, I do that outside of Cricut, typically in Canva. Again, another free resource for you to use. So let me show you a few different shapes that you can make and how to make them. We'll start with the simplest, and that is the square. So if you click the shapes button over here on the left and you just find the square, it's actually labeled square. And I'm not being facetious here. The reason that I differentiate, because there's another one that has the rounded corners that we're going to talk about in a minute. That looks almost square, but it's not quite. So we just added our square, but we want to create that rectangle shape that we want for our label. So we're going to come up to the ribbon at the very top and we're going to adjust the size. Before you do that, you need to click the unlock button to remove the lock proportions, because we do need to make sure that we can adjust both width and height. And the dimensions that I use for my labels are going to be 0.75 by 2.5. So those dimensions right there tend to work the best for me for my projects. So that is what you'll see here after we put those in. Now we have the shape that we're looking for. Now, this is totally optional. You don't have to do this, but I typically go and change the color to this because the images that I use are going to be black and it'll be really hard to see. So we have our first item right here. This is the square label. Okay, pretty simple. Now to create another shape, so let's say we wanted to create the second shape right here. This one, again, same exact process, but you'll see this one says square as well, but it has the little rounded edges. So you'll do the exact same thing that we just did, add that, unlock it, and change your proportions to 0.75 by 2.5. Now, I will say this is my least favorite of the labels shapes. I made a bunch of these because I thought it would look really nice with the rounded edges. It actually, to me, looks like it was an unintentional cut, that it was a mistake. You can even see the way that it looks on here. It just is not as rounded as one would like. So I'm going to show you another option down here, the third option, how I created this rounded label. Now, you could go back into shapes and you could find a shape that you think is similar. So let's say you want to take a circle and you want to adjust it to the same dimensions. So if we do that, what's going to happen? 0.75 by 2.5, you're going to see you get a very long oblong shape, which is not what we're looking for because we really do want to have those nice rounded corners. This is why we're not just going to choose a circle and put it in here. So to do this one just a little bit more challenging, you're going to come down here and pick the pennant option. Okay, so pick one of those pennants, and then we're going to do another pennant. So we'll just pick another pennant. With this second pennant, we're actually going to, if you hover over the corner, you can turn, so you'll see the little arrows there, and we're going to turn it to 180 degrees. All right, so we have our two halves of our pennant, and in those two halves of our pennant, we now want to align them so we can connect them together. So it can be all the way over here, that's fine. You don't have to do this manually. You're just going to take your mouse, hover over both of those pieces there, and then up here, click on align and then center horizontally. Now you have everything aligned perfectly. Just make sure that there's no spaces between your two pieces because we do want to combine these two together. Then we're going to come back and highlight both pieces one more time, and we're going to weld them together. And that'll create one shape. So now we have that one shape, and we're going to go back to the top and we're going to adjust the size. Again, 0.75 by 2.5. So that's the first step. So now that we actually have our label sizes, okay, whatever size or style you want to do, we need to make the holes. So you can do this a couple of ways. If you don't want to have holes, if you don't want your Cricut to make them for you, you can omit this step and you can actually just use an awl or use a crocodile hole punch, whatever, to get those holes. That works as well. But if you're already using Cricut, why not let the Cricut do it for you? So we are going to create those little holes. Now, since I'm using Chicago screws, you'll see that these little samples down here, that is my preference to use Chicago screws, but I'll show you two different options. So of course, we're going to go back to our shapes and we're going to use a circle. The best size that I found for me working with Chicago screws is actually to change it to 0.23. That is the perfect circle for me when I'm working with these specific screws. So I'll put one here and then I'll copy it and then I'll put another one down here. Now you do want to make sure that everything is perfectly aligned. So in this case, again, I might actually move this out of the way and highlight these two together, come back up to align and center horizontally. Now those are perfectly centered. So then when you move your little label back here, you'll see, there we go, looks great. Now, before you do anything else, if you're happy with where these are, I would actually copy this right here to kind of use it as a template. In fact, I'll show you that in just a second. Now, to get your holes lined up perfectly in the center, we are going to once again highlight all three of those together, and we're going to come up to align and then center horizontally. Just like that. So now everything about your label is centered horizontally, but we're not quite done. Now we need to slice out those holes. So with your Cricut, you can only slice 2 layers at a time. And all that means is what we're going to do first is we're going to highlight the label and the circle, just one of them. And then over here in our panel, we're going to click slice. Once you do that, now you can delete, okay, those 2 little sliced options there. We won't need them. And then what you do need to do is you need to send your label to the back. That way you can see your other hole here. You'll do the exact same process. So you're just going to highlight both of those pieces, click on your slice option, and then delete the slices. And that's how you create those even holes for Chicago screws. Now, let's say though that you didn't want to use Chicago screws or you don't have them and you just want to stitch them in place. So let's take a look at another option. Same thing, we can choose the circle shape. And this time we're going to make it a little bit smaller. We're going to do 0.10. So 0.10 is pretty small. It's kind of like a pin size. But then once we have 0.10, we're gonna do 4 of those. So we're just gonna create 4 of our 0.10. And again, it doesn't really matter right now where you place them because you are gonna go back and realign all of them. So then once again, just make sure you get everything aligned how you want it to be. And in this case, sometimes when you're aligning, you may have to remove the bottom piece. So let's just align this. We'll do this to the top, and then we'll align this one. And then we will just move that right over there and get that centered. So then we need to do the same thing that we did before. Remember, we can only do 2 layers at a time. So we'll slice out that first option, then we'll send it to the back, slice out the next option, send to the back. And then when you move that out of the way, now you can just delete those since we don't need them any longer. Another tip, if you know you're going to be using these over and over, obviously I would make copies of them and save them as one of your projects here, but you can also use this one or use another one as a template. So let's say we're just going to change this color here just to make it a little bit easier. And we'll pull over, get this lined up. Let's just align those. Okay, so we just align those horizontally. Let's align them vertically. There we go. So now these are exactly where they need to be. This way you can use it as a template. And once again, we can take that circle shape. And remember, we're using 0.23 for this size here. And then we can move that right over the hole. Then we can copy it and then do that as well. Then once again, I recommend always just centering everything, realigning it just to make sure everything looks perfect. And then you can go through the same process of slicing out each of those holes. So that's how you make the label portion. Now, when it comes to adding your images, again, upload your images from wherever you get your images from. I tend to use Canva. My brand images I already have here. What I found for these particular shapes right here, 0.63. So you'll see, actually let me detach these. You'll see the shapes here, 0.63 is what I typically use for my little shapes, 0.63, because that works well. But again, your images will vary. So what you'll want to do is make sure that you arrange them to the front so you can see them. And then you'll just want to place them here. And you're not placing them permanently because it won't be printing on here, but what you'll be able to do is just eyeball it and make sure everything looks like it's the right size so that you can size your images. A couple things to keep in mind. You do want to make sure that you know where your dead center is. So if your images or if your label's folded in half, you don't get kind of half an image. Also, if you're using Chicago screws, make sure to leave room around the little circles here so that the Chicago screw doesn't go over your image. So once you're ready and you have your images and you have your labels and you feel good about it, the next thing is to click Make and send this to your Cricut. Now you'll have 2 different cuts because the first cut is actually going to be with the vegan leather or with the faux leather or whatever you're using to cut out your labels. So this one will be pretty quick because it does cut through very quickly. So the first setting that I use when I'm working with this faux suede is actually going to be faux leather paper thin. So I tend to use faux leather paper thin on this one. It works out pretty well, but again, as you know with Cricut, make sure you use your own settings and test as you need to. Today when I use this, it actually cut a little too hard, I thought, but that's the standard setting for Cricut's faux leather. For other mat, what we'll end up doing is just doing a basic cut with your HTV, so your heat transfer vinyl or your regular vinyl, whichever one you want to work, and just use the settings that work for you. So when you put this on your mat, the one thing you want to make sure when you're using this vegan leather is that you do put the right side, the nice side, against the mat. All right, so here are my images for our brand here. And we'll just take one of our little labels. So again, if you're using regular vinyl, you would just use a carrier and you would be able to push that over and then just rub it on if you've worked with regular permanent vinyl. But we are going to be doing heat transfer. So for me, I always like to make sure that I cut the transfer down close to the image especially because it does tend to show on this faux leather. So then decide also when you're putting these on, make sure you realize which side is going to be visible. So in this case, if I'm wearing, maybe I'm putting this on a beanie, I probably want the anchor to be facing this way. The flowers doesn't really matter because it's the same shape every single way. So I'm gonna put this one here, again, making sure I allot enough space for the Chicago screw. And then also we'll put a flower. And again, I'm just eyeballing this, but feel free to do exact measurements, whatever works best for you. Then I'm going to take this over to my Easy Press, and I'm going to press this, and I do this for no longer than 15 seconds, and then that tends to wipe, or tends to come right off. So then you just take your screws. So here's this side. Here's this side, and then if you have it going up, it'll look like this, and then if you have it going down, it'll look like this. So that's a quick overview of how I make my labels using a Cricut. So if you have any other questions or need clarification, don't hesitate to reach out. And until next time, everybody, see ya!